my name is Kacena. I'm the owner of K Contemporary Gallery here in Denver, Colorado. We're in lower downtown. If you haven't joined us in the gallery, we have a 3-story building in Lodo. Now, the first story of the gallery is very much white cube kind of programming space, and our basement is more of what I like to, that has the feel of like an art wine cellar. And then up here on the top floor is something where we have it more fluid for exhibition space, so that we can do kind of interesting programming, pop-ups, kind of more things around discussion. And as I see us opening back up after the pandemic kind of cools down a little bit, this would be more of like a salon space where we have more of these discussions and more of these conversations. Pre-pandemic, we used to have kind of a panel discussion around every exhibition because I really see contemporary art as a catalyst for conversations. So speaking of that, first of all, Jordan and I are both fully vaccinated. That's why we're in gallery without masks. We don't have anybody here with us, but we're very much looking forward to us opening back up and having these in-person conversations again and engaging our community with these discussions around contemporary art. So I'm going to set up the panel. We're going to have a discussion tonight a little bit about mindful viewing of artwork and why it's important to recognize kind of what's coming up for us as we look at art. Here joining me in gallery is Jordan Wolfson. This is his exhibition that we have here. So just as a little bit of housekeeping, as you're joining us from Zoom, if you wouldn't mind keeping mute on your end until a little bit later, we'll then open it up for like a question and answer phase at the end of the discussion. Also, you can look at, if you're in gallery view, there's 3 cameras set up here in gallery, so you can kind of see all the different angles of this small pop-up exhibition. Then if you would also keep it on speaker view when you're not browsing those, that way Sue, who's also joining us on the Zoom call, you can see her discussing as well. So did I get that right?
I think so.
Okay. So thank you again for joining us. So we have a pop-up here in the gallery with Jordan Wolfson that's called, it's his interiors in black and white and yellow. And Jordan, again, is joining us here in the gallery. We're also joined by Sue Hammond West, who I believe is in her studio in Boulder. Are you there, Sue?
I'm here.
Yay, we did it. Obviously, IT is not my specialty, so I'm just hoping that we did this right and that it's working. So thank you so much for joining us, Sue. Sue is a painter and a mixed media artist who combines art making with an interest in consciousness, non-dualism, and philosophical concerns. Her exhibitions include the Boulder Museum of Contemporary Art, the Boulder Public Library, Radiance Group, Boulder, Beacon Street Gallery in Chicago, the University of Notre Dame Iris Gallery, and her publications include Shambhala Times, Not Enough Night, and several other words that I'm not going to try to pronounce here, it looks like. And Sue has received awards from the NEA, the Indian Arts Commission, the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. She has taught at the Art Institute of Chicago, Harshaw Creek, Arizona, Steamboat Springs Mixed Media Painting School, Colorado Little Street Studios in Chicago, and is currently a professor of the visual arts and recently promoted, has the additional duties of dean at Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado. She teaches contemporary and visual forms and how to infuse art with palpable transforming presence. I hope I even kind of got any of that.
Thank you, Doug.
I did that? Okay. Also joining us is Jordan Wolfson. Jordan is an artist who was born and raised in Los Angeles and graduated with an MFA from the Yale School of Art in 1991. Exhibiting both nationally and internationally, Wolfson's work is represented in the permanent collections worldwide, including the Albright Knox Art Gallery, the James T. Dyke Collection, and the Ballingsley Museum of Contemporary Art in Ireland. Wolfson received numerous awards, including the Pollock Krasner Foundation grant, an Ingram Merrill Foundation grant, and a Purchase Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. He was a fellow of Fine Arts Works Center in Providence, Massachusetts, and the Ballingsley Art Foundation in Ireland. His recurring exploration of form, space, and light, Wolfson has been investigating his relationship between perception, mark, and consciousness. This has led to his experience of painting as a life practice and means for a fundamental understanding. Jordan Wolfson currently lives in Longmont, Colorado, co-parenting and raising 2 daughters, and maintains a studio in North Boulder. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
And thank you, Sue, for joining us. Thank you.
So this exhibition started with a studio tour of your studio in Boulder. Jordan had just finished what it has become this exhibition, which is 5 singular paintings of the same corner of his studio. On one of the cameras, you can see an image right over here, which is kind of a more fully rendered representational version of this painting that you have explored, what, 80 times now?
A lot. A lot of times.
So first tell me, why have you painted this corner of your studio 80 plus times?
Well, it's available.
That's true. Paint what you know, right?
Well, it's, I'm interested in space and the way the experience of space and the way interiors hold space. So you can, you know, like in a room, there's a space, and you can like be with the space, and it's bounded by the room, the walls, kind of, so you get some sense of, oh, here it is, here's the space. So, I mean, I started doing that at the Fine Art Work Center after grad school, at the residency. I did an interior with this chair, just this solo little red wooden chair in this space, and I really liked it. I liked doing it. And then when I moved abroad, I ended up painting where I lived, my apartment. That became my main motif. I just over and over again painted the way the light would come in and fill the room, and I just kept doing interiors. There was something about space being held, light, particularly there. The light was so great, and I think there's something like doing a Roth cup, but from observation. So it's like I'm interested in that presence that fills a space, but I like working from observation, perceptually. Mm-hmm. So I ended up doing interiors. And then I painted the other direction of my studio, looking the other way. But this one is over by the windows, and I like the light coming in. I like that. I mean, I've moved the chairs a little bit over the years.
Well, and I understand that also you've switched studios and kind of recreated this scene in
That's true.
the next studio that you moved to.
That's true. All three of those chairs, well, two of those chairs actually were with me abroad when I lived in Israel.
Oh, wow.
In fact, they came from the States, went abroad, and came back to the States. Well, you can't tell. The yellow, the one on the left, although here you can't see anything, but that one I picked up out of, I think it was a Goodwill in Providence, Rhode Island.
Okay, so everybody who's an artist who's watching this right now, and you're like waiting for inspiration, just like stop, like, right? The corner of your studio can be inspiration, and you can paint it 80 times and still be fascinated with that space.
If you're into it.
Well, and that's what we want to talk about today too, is so what is it that we see? And what is it that comes up for you when you're observing art? So what we're going to do really quick, because I have a lot of questions for Sue Hammond, especially about that. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to play a little video. We have a video that accompanies this exhibition in the gallery. It's about 4 minutes, and we cut down to a quicker version for you to experience via the web comments. So Stowe, could you go ahead and play that video for us really quick?
And I'll mute this, and then you can unplug.
Drawn to working in different ways, coming at the painting in different ways, different attitudes. And this came basically out of a sense of play, trying out different things, different ways of working. And I could see that what it gave me was a variety of ways of investigating the motif, looking at the situation in different ways, exploring different aspects. Sometimes the emphasis was on space, sometimes more on form. Sometimes I was engaged with the imagined tactility as opposed to the straightforward visual experience. Different ways of coming at the situation. And I found myself exploring the situation over and over again as a way of finding my way to what is underneath everything, inside everything. Exploring the relationship between form and awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're back, and that was a little bit of an introduction to what I think Jordan is exploring visually in these paintings. And you know, when you're here in the gallery, we have this exhibition set up to where these 5 paintings are directly in dialogue with each other. So you're kind of in this smaller space that's been created out of the larger gallery, where it almost becomes a meditation, especially when you hear Jordan speaking of the work, you know, through the video, and looking at those things that he's pointing out as you're kind of observing each one of these spaces. And that's where I really want to kind of start with, what is this idea of mindful viewing? And Sue, could you help us with some definitions and kind of start us off with that conversation?
Mindful viewing. One of the things that it's such an interesting question, because mindfulness is kicked around so much now and it's very generic. But when I think of mindful viewing in a painting, for example, I think spending a lot of time with it. Anything mindful now in a Buddhist sense is like a monkey mind or beta frequency, which is jumping from here to there. But really, I think when we're talking about mindful viewing of a painting, we want to slow that down. So we go into the alpha frequency, and then even a slower vibrational format of the brain. And so there's a couple of different ways that you could do that. And I invite the viewers here in this event tonight to go see Jordan's work and to see other paintings. And a couple of ways you can do that is by looking at the side of the painting and then going to the other side of the painting. And this is one technique that we use to look at the painting. And the topography on Jordan's work is so amazing. And then if you sit still for 5 minutes and stare at the painting, and I've seen this with a Van Gogh, for example, some paintings open. And I think Jordan talks about this in his book, Doug, this book called Painting and Consciousness, this idea of opening. And I think that's what he sees when he looks across the room. His mind actually opens when he looks at the presence of the space. And then for him, it's an attempt to get that presence into the space of the painting, which is somewhat of a, I don't know, alchemical processy. And I do have a quote from the book that might be interesting here, where he says, and maybe this is a question back to Jordan, without the interior or the inner urging, there will not be enough alchemical heat in our minds to stop and open, for the material to be imbued energetically, and for the being to be met by being in a practice of painting. And Meredith Monk, who was a visiting artist at Naropa University, who teaches a lot about singing, she calls it to drop down in a psychic state. And that's what I would say is the mindfulness or the mind in art.
That's fascinating. Jordan, do you want to elaborate a little bit on your quote?
Well, yeah, I guess what thinking about that quote, it's that inner urging and the heat gives us the energy to, I think what we're doing is we're meeting all of the distraction. So it allows the distraction to settle. And then there's the possibility of being present. And then the presence that's here is like just available. So it takes, I think it takes an energy, a kind of an effort to like try to meet that torrent of habitual momentum that we're all going through. You know, it's not that the heat or the energy is doing anything to the presence. It's doing it to all the habits of mind that then allow this just simple being just to be here. You know, we can be. So I guess maybe that.
It does make sense. I read here recently that the Met had done a study that their average viewer spends at most 7 seconds with a painting as they walk through it. And I remember thinking about that in relation to like an art fair or even an exhibit. And I was like, boy, I wonder, like, because I see so many thousands of people walk by a booth with like all this museum quality work in it. And it's like, boy, they maybe spent 7 seconds looking at the booth, you know, let alone even just a singular piece of artwork. And as you mentioned, Sue, I've read this, I think, in another space too, that, you know, if you do sit with a painting for 5 minutes, that the whole universe can speak to you. Because it is starting to become this idea of being aware. So how do we start to train ourselves to really kind of be present with what we're looking at, and how to, like, because I feel like it almost is a training that we have to do. We use our phones and we look at imagery in a really different context nowadays. It's about scrolling, and I think it's almost like we've been trained to absorb as much information as quickly as we can and then get to the next place. So what is the benefit of us slowing down and spending more time with a piece? Do you have some thoughts about that, Sue?
Well, I think probably everyone on this call could testify that there's objects that stop our minds, right? And it doesn't necessarily even need to be a piece of art, although art has a tendency to do it more because it's hand-touched. There's a human element in it, and depending on how the piece was made. But in Jordan's case, you have this topography of touching. I would say that his work has the juxtaposition between the sensual and the inconceivable. And you can even see that in the way that he presents. He goes from a sort of intellect into very much slower speech and this kind of intention that is from another place than language itself. So that's what paintings do, is they stop our minds. I mean, literally. And you can really tell when you live with the painting, because you'll look at it, like I said, looking at it from the side, you'll look at it from a peripheral vision, and you'll look at it when you're not conscious of looking at it. And those moments, the thing kind of vibrates or reverberates in a way that is not dead. It's not a static piece of material. It's actually alive. And I think everyone probably has that experience with an object at one time or another.
Well, and for me, I think a lot of it comes down to, and sometimes I get really woo-woo with this, where I'm like, I believe art is magic. And I think art, the intention of art in its purest form is to communicate and to transform in some way or another the person who stands before it. And that's why I think it's pure magic, because that feels like the definition of it. It's imbued with the ability to transform the person who stands in front of it. And that's the only reason why it exists as an object, as a thing, is because it's to communicate. So what are you hoping people see or feel or experience? Like, I know, certain artists have a very much like a social justice theme with their work, or they want to bring up ideas around the infinite that is the topic that art can bring up. So what is it that sticks with you in your art making practice that seems to keep coming up in these views of your studio?
I guess it's, well, I'm interested in sharing with people the experience of presence in the everyday, presence. And I mean, it's not not in a mystical presence, it's just in a daily being here, and how that daily being here keeps opening. And it's, and just sort of the pleasure of that, the experiencing of how the form is holding the space, and then actually the form and the space start to interact in a way that stops being as distinct. I mean, that's for me what's going on in some of the.
Do you feel like people, or is this kind of part of your practice, that like these are call and responses, that they, like for me, there was an overwhelming need for me to present this work in this space where you saw them in their periphery, that they were very much in conversation with each other. Do you see this whole body of work as something that needs to be in conversation with each other, or are they their own things?
Well, they exist as their own, as distinct objects, but I certainly think of them, experience them, would like to present them as interactive. How they relate to each other, and the space between them actually is part of their interaction, and so that's part of what interests me about having the more representational rendition with what we would think of as more abstract, but they're all done from observation. It's all a response to the situation that I'm engaged with. So there's something about that unfolding of the daily that I'm interested in sharing. So, and then a kind of how that ends up affecting one's experience set away from the work. It's like, oh, it's like, well, what's happening in this space now? Is that I'm in my life, in my house or whatever, what might, this space feel like?
So you were kind of starting the discussion around how you see Jordan viewing that space and him making observation. And then speaking a little bit about the physicality of how we can observe and sit with one of his paintings. Where does that crossover between what Jordan's seeing and what we're observing, how does that like start to make itself apparent in the way that we're looking? For me, when I think about kind of mindful viewing of anything, and especially with art, because I think about this stuff all the freaking time, is I start trying to be aware of what's coming up for me while I'm looking at something. So my initial observations are usually about form and color and composition and push and pull. And then I start asking myself, well, why am I feeling this about it? because I'm starting to become aware of what is underneath that intellectual thought or analyzation of a piece. And on my podcast recently, I had two artists that were discussing the use of object, and we started talking about the banana getting duct taped to a wall, and why is that art, and all these things. And that artist brought up a really interesting thing to me that kind of expanded the way that I look at it. Is he, sure, the intellectual conversation about what is art and why we're viewing it and what is the object, but he was asking questions like, I want people to ask themselves, why am I pissed off that a banana sold for $150,000? Why are those things starting to, why does that bother me? Or why does it bother me that a piece of artwork sold for a certain amount of money? Or really being aware of somebody, of what's coming up for you. If somebody's like, I hate this piece of artwork, asking themselves, what is it about this piece of artwork that I hate? Or what is it that I'm so put off by? Or, and really kind of focusing those questions onto their reactions and then understanding their response. I don't know if there was a question in there, Sue, but please help me out with this.
Well, what I think you're saying, Doug, is you're asking what is art on a very fundamental basis, and I think in terms of Jordan's paintings, the question, what is a painting? And I do think that Jordan is a formalist. He does look at the room and he follows the lines of the room and he creates the marks based on what he sees. So there is a very formalist and process orientation to what he's doing. And I would say that there's a consideration of the edges as a formal dialogue with the painting. So we have that level here. With this, the banana speaks to that. What is art? What is the art object? It really pushes our conception or conceptualization of what art is. And that's why it's such a wonderful discourse, art in general, and the banana. But just getting back to Jordan's work, what is a painting? And I think for Jordan, it goes between the physical world, the physicality of a painting, stretcher bars, the cloth, the paint. The paint is a very important thing. He has a love for paint. It's put down with an energy, so there's an energetic field that's created here, right? And then you actually transcend matter and time in his work because he's actually doing it as he's observing and making these marks. And at some point, he's going into some kind of, I would call it a trance. And Joseph Campbell talked about this idea of proper and improper art, which might also relate to the banana. Proper art being art that transcends itself. It actually is transcendent and it goes beyond space and time. And I think we see that with Jordan, with the way that he's speaking about his work and with the way the paintings are affecting our perception. We can't quite land on them. So there's a transcendent quality here. I think with the banana, it goes more into the improper art, which is more didactic, right? And so there's such a wonderful question of what is an art object? What is a painting? How does it transcend matter and space and time? And if it doesn't, what is it doing?
So as you were speaking there, my brain was going in a lot of different directions because I'm, again, surrounded by all of this work, and I invite everybody who's watching to come down and spend as much time as they can with each piece. 5 minutes might seem like an eternity, so let's break it down to 30 seconds each and just spend 30 seconds with each piece rotating between them and see kind of what comes up. As I'm sitting in this room, for example, the piece to Jordan's left, there's so much movement in the mark making there. And there's so much of these kind of places of punctuation that stop my eye. And there's almost like this frenetic energy in it. Whereas, you know, you look at maybe some of the pieces that are more, the darker ones, like this black one that's directly across from me, like some of the brushwork itself is larger. It has a different understanding because it's all in these shades of black. And as you're talking to me about what is a painting and kind of the formalist aspects of it, you know, I immediately am switching between those conversations as I'm looking at these different renderings of this space. Tell me, does that resonate with when you're painting them? Like how does each one kind of come into existence in such a different way?
Well, I am responding formally. It's like the rules of each paint, like if each painting is a game or a setup of how I'm going to respond. And so, okay, this, you know, I'm going to find the geometry of the forms and the value relationships in a more normal way we think of setting up the painting. That one would be more like, well, I'm just going to make a mark in relation to seeing the space, to seeing the situation. I'm not making a mark to describe the geometry or the value relationships. I'm making a mark as in seeing. And the marks just accumulate as I'm looking. So it's like a different, it ends up being a different kind of tracing of my experience. And so it ends up resulting in a different form. But what I find interesting, and thank you, Sue, that was beautiful, all the things you said, I'm very touched. And what you were saying, you know, there's something about that I find just wild, that form, you know, form can give rise in us to all kinds of experience and all kinds of, you know, when you talked about, you know, something transcendent or beyond time and space, but just, yes, that somehow form can bring a sense of resonance that stops our mind, that wakes us up, that gives us pleasure. I mean, you know, you listen to some good music. I mean, how does form do that? And that's just wild. And so it's like I'm playing with form in relation to my experience of the presence of the room and how each form ends up having a kind of slightly different flavor and yet something common. And I just, anyway.
Do you think you recognize that more after the fact? Or do you think you...
Oh, yeah.
It's not something that you're consciously going,
oh, no.
Okay, this is a much different way of looking at form.
Well, when I'm painting, I'm aware that, you know, that way of painting is different. You know, there are different ways of putting the painting together or responding to the situation. But I'm not, you know, my mind isn't, I'm not being philosophical or, no, I'm thinking, oh, another mark, or oh, I should make a mark here, or oh, that needs a little attention, or whatever it might be, you know, making a painting. Yeah.
I want to put out an invitation to all of our viewers that at the end of this conversation, which is in just a few minutes, just a little bit off, we're going to do a little bit of a question and answer with Jordan too. So Just gonna keep that ruminating so that if you have a couple of questions, let us know. There seems to be, I don't know if there's, we have a little bit of an IT issue, but I think we just resolved it there. So hopefully we weren't on pause for too long there. Sue, could you kind of wrap us up with some ideas on your end about like, I know you were talking about like physically mapping from edge to edge, you know, the canvas as a part or a modality to mindful viewing. Do you have some other tricks for us, like to how to be like? I don't know why I call it a trick, but I feel like we're almost at that stage where we forgot how to like think. We forgot how to view. We forgot how to ask questions. And do you have some ideas for us about like when we're in a setting or when we need to take that break to how to just kind of slow down and notice what we're observing?
There's a couple really great techniques. One is to put in some earplugs.
Oh, there you go.
So, you know, because it's a sensual experience and it has to do with perceiving and looking, if you block one of your senses, it can be a very different experience. So that one is really a trip. So try that. That's a cool idea. The other one that I love, and I didn't realize I was doing this, is in the Buddhist tradition. There is a practice called sky gazing, right? And so I have this thing, you know, it's sort of like your Gucci slippers, Doug. I love the low lawn chair in the backyard. So you can try the lawn chair and just look at the sky. And there's something that happens where your perception opens. And so this is what I think Jordan's doing with his paintings, is he's having this experience of the perception opening. And so the sky is one of the ways that we could do that, because there's no judgment. It's just the sky. And when we get into a painting and we either like it or don't like it, then our ego comes in and there's more judgment. So try to pick something like the sky where there's no judgment. It's just the sky, and just sit there for 5 minutes staring at the sky and see what happens to your being. Just notice what happens, and you will inevitably drop into a slower frequency of your mind, and that's a meditative state. And I do think that it's equal to what Jordan's doing as he paints. So those are two techniques that are really fun, and they can really heal you. It's like magic. It's like what you said, Doug. Looking at art has a magical resonance.
I absolutely agree. And I love that idea of putting on like some noise canceling headphones or earplugs. You know, that was I'm excited. I'm excited to try that. Well, you know, because we are so kind of trained to like listen to those noises from our phones that are telling us to like pay attention. And I think that's part of what it is right now too, is so many things are vying for our attention always. And it's how do we then direct what we really want to pay attention to? And you know, the cloud viewing sounds very much kind of like this idea of forest bathing that I've been trying to.
Forest bathing?
Forest bathing. In Japan, they actually I want to say in the last 20, 30 years, you can get a prescription for forest bathing.
Wow.
Which is, you know, it's a stress related thing. It's going out into nature. And the idea is that not to do it for like, I have a hike and I have a destination and we're going to this place. It's just going out and being curious and mindfully observing what's around you with no destination, no expectation of anything. And that's been actually something that's been prescribed for stress and stuff.
Yeah, just think about it. What happens in our culture is that we're editing all the time. Right? You're editing when you're on your phone and you're looking through the web, there's pop-up ads and you're just filtering them out. So you're editing all the time. So when you put the earplugs in, you don't have to edit the sound, you know. So it's a wonderful practice.
And I also love that you were talking about not having judgment about what's coming up for you when you're viewing a painting. Because I think I notice that all the time as a gallerist, that, you know, there's an intimidation factor for people when they're just coming into a space, like a white cube gallery space, because we use our own vernacular. We have our own language around talking about artwork and the formalities. And I think that too might be coming up when you're looking at artwork, and if you're saying, I don't understand, you know, then there's all of a sudden a judgment about, you know, why you're not understanding it, or if that there needs to be this understanding about it instead of just being present with that work. Jordan, do you have, before we go into some questions here, do you have some thoughts that maybe came to the surface that you want to share about this work? Or
I'm just enjoying the conversation.
Well, so are we.
So yeah, this is great.
Okay, so I think what we'll do is we'll go ahead and open it up to some conversation. I think Stowe Miller, who's been dutifully off to our side here, managing the meeting. Does anybody have a question that they would like to ask Jordan? Please unmute yourself at this point, and we'll try to wrangle you in.
Oh, they're gonna unmute, or is he gonna?
Or is Jordan? Or is there? Were people putting them in the conversations? Or
No. So
okay.
they can unmute and just. Okay.
Yeah. Does anybody have a question for Jordan? How about I just open it up?
Sue
or me? I'm a Sagittarius. I don't know if that was one of the questions.
No. Nothing.
This is your time to ask about how.
Is there anyone out there?
You can put it in the chat if you don't want to speak it. That's also another.
Type it in the chat is fine. It's at the bottom of your Zoom screen.
Hi,
Jordan,
I'll say something.
Okay. Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Hi, Jordan. This is Sarah Gilly, one of your students,
Sarah.
and I've really enjoyed this book that you put out, Painting and Consciousness. I don't understand it all, but I try to pick a sentence and try to understand it. You say a painting is a kind of coalescence of consciousness. And sometimes when I'm painting, I might be in that flow for a moment, but it's really hard to get into consciousness and imbue that in an external way in a painting. And I think a lot of viewers who may not be familiar with your work, you have an incredible website that helps you understand, for those of us who need a little bit of guidance, how to access your paintings. And I was so excited when I heard the Naropa Institute was going to be involved in this tonight. Because I think it is really important for us to, people that understand these things kind of help us who don't. So how do you get consciousness to come through? I mean, you've been painting a long time, so
Well,
how do you get that to come through?
yeah, I think, some of what Sue was talking about and some of what we've been talking about here is if we can settle some of the chatter in our minds, consciousness is simply here. So it's not so much that I need to get consciousness into the painting as try to settle some of the distraction. If I can just settle my mind and just get here and be present as I'm working, consciousness will naturally inform my marking and my material, because that's what is here all the time. I'm just so busy with all of the stuff. So, you know, it's like, huh. So, you know, Sue was, you know, suggesting different ways of, you know, these possible exercises or different, you know, and Doug is asking, you know, how do we settle? And so that seems to be more like, oh, how do I settle? I wouldn't worry about getting consciousness into it as much as just settling down when I'm going to, or let's flip that. If I've got a lot of frenetic energy, you know, and my mind is just racing, how can I use that energy directly in my mark without staying hooked in my thinking, but just take that energy and write it into the marking in a more direct kind of handling of it. And then it'll have its own momentum. It'll have its own life.
Well, and I think that comes from just doing it a lot too, and like allowing that process to be. I know, you know, early on in my studio practice, once I started understanding what the hell I was doing a little better, one of the things that I did was a meditation at the beginning and just like acknowledging that I'm just here to allow it to come out.
Yeah.
You know, that I'm not judging it, that it's already a painting, it already exists, it's already found its home, it's already sold or whatever it needs to do in the future. And I'm just here to be that vehicle to let it come into fruition. And I think for me, that was a turning point where I stopped putting expectation on what it had to be as a painting. And also, so thank you so much for your question. And thank you for the generosity of assuming that we have any idea of what we're talking about. And that we were going to inform them. And I think we have some other questions here.
I have a question from Bill Wolfson, and he wanted to ask Jordan how these 80+ studio paintings of yours have influenced your other art.
So I don't know if you guys heard that, but this is from Bill Wilson. And Bill was asking how these 80+ studio paintings of this same space in Jordan's studio has influenced the way he does the rest of his artistic practices.
Well, I mean, I find myself, well, it goes back before the 80+ studio paintings because it was in the years after grad school when I was living in Jerusalem, and my apartment became my main motif, and hundreds of drawings, I don't know how many paintings, and it wasn't just the actual physical apartment, it was the space, the energy, the atmosphere of living there ended up impacting my formal decisions or my interest in the interaction of form and space and light and marking and all those things together. There was something in the energy of that place that really impacted how I started to explore what painting meant for me. And so the repetition and the flux and the mark and all those things together ended up moving in a particular direction. So.
Do we have some more questions?
I think Owen and Karen would like to ask a question.
Great.
Karen, do you have a question for Jordan?
Yes, I do. I do have a question. Well, it's not a question. In a way, it was a thought I wanted to share with Jordan, which was that when I first got to know Jordan, which was really only about 3 years ago, I think, or know his work, it was at a time when I had been thinking a lot about the idea of beingness and things possessing beingness, like, I mean, and it was really sort of
my mind was going in many incredible places about a rock having beingness, a tree, all the things that have beingness. And then I ran into Jordan and his paintings at Naropa, actually, and they kind of blew my mind because there was this beingness about his paintings, and they further sort of developed, in my mind anyway, into they are about the beingness of objects, but about the beingness of space. And then they are about the beingness of an actual thing hanging on the wall, which is 4 pieces of wood forming a frame and canvas stretched over it. So the levels of beingness are, to me, are, and I'm a painter myself, and I'm very interested in my own painting in the idea of beingness and the ephemeral quality of reality and the ephemeral quality of memory and the stories we tell ourselves. But Jordan's always stop me up short, and I think they get more and more, at least as I'm seeing them and appreciating them, more about this idea of beingness and what the fuck it really means anyway. You know, it's such a paradox, and it's like a Mobius. What was it? What's that called again? That
Mobius strip.
The Mobius strip that it just goes back around on itself. So I just wanted to share that with you, Jordan.
That's lovely. You know, when you said the Mobius strip, which is, I was just showing it to my 10-year-old daughter.
Oh.
And I thought, hey, I've got something to show you. Apparently she'd seen it before and she wasn't particularly impressed. But, you know, I did the line and it was like, hey, it's one line, you know? And, but what's happening, you know, is we take, you know, a piece of, you know, a strip of paper that seems to have 2 sides, and we twist it, and then all of a sudden it only has one side. And, you know, there's, you know, the form, which is sensory, perceived. And then there's this non-form, presence, and beingness. And, you know, wait a second. Are they 2 things? Is this one thing? And it's like how to recognize how do I, you know, it's like, what is going on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, and what they're talking about now, the universe is full of dark matter. And it is matter, but it's sort of not there, but it's there. And yeah, your paintings are, they are, yeah. I wouldn't say they're full of dark matter, but they're full of beingness and consciousness too, and conscious seeing, but in the conscious seeing is a conscious being. You know, the seeing and the being are connected.
Yes.
Well, and this is what I love about contemporary art, is it becomes this catalyst for conversation about everything. Like here we are on a very esoteric conversation about just the pure idea of beingness, which, God, how did you know that that's what we're going to talk about when we're looking at this painting behind you? You know, is that's where we end up in this conversation. Thank you so much for your observation. And still, do we have any more questions?
Not in the chat.
If there's anybody else who would like to ask a question of Jordan or Sue before we wrap up, this is your time.
I hope this might have a short answer or a long answer, but the show is titled Interiors in Black and White, and then in parentheses, and yellow. Could you talk a little bit about the yellow?
Okay, I'm just going to repeat the question. So this is from Stowe Miller, who's my associate, who's been doing all of our running the Zoom meeting off to the side. He was asking, so the title of the exhibition here is Interiors in Black and White, and then in parentheses, and yellow. And Stowe wants to know about the and yellow.
Well, when I start the paintings, I'm actually laying a ground of Indian yellow with lots of oil, and then painting into it. So there's some yellow, and then
Is that your underpainting?
it's the stuff, it's the gold that's peeking through.
Yeah.
And then it gets into, because it's oil, it kind of gets into the black and white that I paint on top of it because it's wet. And then as I keep working on it, I think, oh, I need to put a little Indian yellow into the white to fit what's there, and then it ends up being black and white and yellow.
So a very formalist answer.
Yeah. I could get more, but I'll leave it at that.
Well, are there any other questions? Well, Sue Hammond West, thank you so much for joining us. I think, you know, what you do as an artist and what you teach at Naropa is so important in the way that we consider art and how we view it. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sue.
And Jordan, thank you for presenting this esoteric place to meditate on being and on form and on this ongoing obsession with the corner of your studio.
Thank you.
I'm really grateful to be able to present this at the gallery, and I encourage everybody, this is the last week of this pop-up exhibition on the second floor here at the gallery. So please come in. We are by appointment, but we're also here. So if you don't have an appointment and you find yourself in Denver, please feel free to stop by and come make some mindful observations yourself.
And thank you for all this. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. You know, that's what I think, again, that's what I'm really excited about is, you know, I have infinite curiosity for the way that we can view our world and our understanding of it through art as a catalyst for those conversations. So I'm looking forward to having more of them with you guys, and hopefully very soon in person. I look forward to hosting you guys here. Thank you for joining us, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in person again. Cheers.